Good afternoon, collectors. Hope everyone is having a great summer, and now that the kids are back in school, we can settle into thinking about those fall and Halloween displays. For those who may not be familiar with the Department 56 history, I thought I'd briefly go over a few details before we get started this afternoon and I introduce our guest. Department 56 was founded in 1976, and that's when the original Snow Village was introduced. Then a little later on, 1984, we introduced Dickens Village. In 1986, we had Alpine Village and New England Village. Yep. Correct me if I'm wrong on these, Rick.
So far, so good.
Okay. 1987, we added Christmas in the City, and in 1990, we added the North Pole. In 2009, Department 56 became part of UNESCO. Now, UNESCO is based in a Chicago suburb called Itasca, and we are here in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. And in 2011, we moved into this facility here in Eden Prairie. And that brings me to you, Rick.
All right.
So we are here in our, what we sometimes call Two Village Place, our second home here in Eden Prairie. And I'd like to introduce Rick Jackson, who is the Director of Creative Design and Development. Rick has been with the company for a little more than 21 years.
Yep.
And he's got much more of the technical expertise as far as how our pieces are made. And I thought it would be great fun to have Rick come aboard this afternoon and talk a little bit about some of that part of his business. So today we're going to concentrate on accessories, and we're going to talk about the difference between resin and porcelain. And Rick brought a few illustrations here to show us how things are made. And I'm hoping that you as collectors will have some questions about what we're going to be talking about. And Nate will jump in with some questions if you post some for us. And Rick, great to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this. And Rick is one of the good guys here at Department 56, along with Nate. Got to mention that.
Make sure we mention everybody in the room.
Everybody in the room, right. Rick is going to talk about accessories. And we've got some of our accessories are ceramic, some of them are porcelain, and now some of them are resin.
Yeah.
And go ahead and tell us what you can tell us, which are harder to produce and things like that.
Exactly. So what I thought I would do today is just talk about the three materials that we use for accessories and how we make those decisions. And some of the decisions have to do with the production of it, so I'm going to show you some of the different molding aspects for the different materials. As most of you know, if you buy a porcelain house, like in our Heritage Village, Dickens Village, North Pole, and all of those, you're going to get a porcelain house. And when we have a porcelain house, we'll have a porcelain accessory. And if you end up with a Snow Village house, it's going to be a ceramic house with a ceramic accessory. Both the porcelain accessory and the ceramic accessory use the same molding techniques that we've used, and I'm sure a number of you out there have had the opportunity to see when we talk about how our product is molded and developed and produced overseas in the factories, as well as the sculpting that happened here at Two Village Place. The figurines follow the same molding practices of the houses where everything is broken down, and I'll show a little bit more of that. Believe it or not, we've had resin in the line since its beginning. There are certain aspects of the line that require and can only be produced in resin, but we've also made some decisions, like with Hot Properties and some of those pieces, where it'll be a resin house and then a resin accessory. We do that for just one, to have a differentiation between our core line, and also in some cases when we're doing figurines and things, to capture the likeness or the figural aspect of it, like a Superman, or in this case, this is the Elf on the Shelf. To be loyal to the licensing, you can see how skinny the legs are, how skinny the arms are, how skinny even the body is. Something like that you just wouldn't be able to achieve in porcelain or ceramic, so we'll default to resin. Sometimes we'll have pieces in the line where we use multiple materials. This is a piece from Snow Village Halloween. On the scary part of Snow Village Halloween, we'll have ceramic houses, but the figures will all be resin because of the nature of the design, the trying to get things long and skinny, make it scary. We'll add different materials and things like that. So you have your porcelain, your ceramic, and then you go to all resin and all resin. Again, it's the nature of what the piece is. And again, most of it has to do with a decision made on our part to differentiate, but also more importantly, to capture the likeness of a licensed piece. And so this is a good example.
So a lot of the licensed accessories are being done in resin so that you can get a truer icon image?
Exactly. If you look at a piece like this where it's porcelain, or a piece like this, you can only get the legs so long because you have to pour the porcelain in. The legs have to be at a minimum thickness to get everything to flow. And so if you're doing Batman and Robin is in his tights, Batman's in his tights, you want that to be a noticeable part of it. It just wouldn't come off in porcelain or resin, or porcelain or ceramic. It'd just be too heavy looking. So we go to resin to capture the true likeness of the
So when you're doing
material.
So when you're doing the licensed pieces, do you have to do that, get permission, or do they have
Yeah.
to sign off from the licensors?
Yeah, and so again, if we're doing especially a facial license where we're trying to capture a specific actor or something, the resin is going to hold that detail of the face, the eyes, everything like that will be held much better in resin, and will be much better able to replicate the likeness of the actor or the character in the like Superman, Batman type of thing.
And the Harry Potter series as well.
Yeah, definitely with the Harry Potter, we'll use resin because of some of the nature of the way we form the pieces, but also to get that recognition. Resin has a very small shrinkage rate, and it comes out of a rubber mold, so it holds the detail, whereas porcelain shrinks 14%, ceramic shrinks 5%, and so some of that can wash away the detail. So we just have to make a decision on what's best for the product line.
So does that also make a difference then when the accessory artists, people like Tate and Alex, when they're working on these accessories, they have to take the shrinkage or non-shrinkage
Exactly.
into consideration?
Yeah.
Okay.
And exactly, and also when we're drawing the pieces for porcelain or ceramic, we have to take into consideration the molding process, whereas resin, we have a lot more flexibility due to the rubber molds, and so we can have a little more fun stretching out some of the figurines and the dynamic between two characters in a scene. So maybe I can show the
Absolutely.
molding.
Let's take a look at Rick has brought a couple of mold pieces here to illustrate the difference between the production of making a resin piece as opposed to making a ceramic or porcelain piece. In ceramic and porcelain, we can use kind of interchangeably here because the process is exactly the same.
The process is the same. The difference is the firing and things like that. But as far as the molding process and the production process, virtually identical.
Yeah. And once you get both of them finished, then the painting is all done by hand, whether it be molded out of resin or porcelain.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like all our product, it's virtually a handmade industry, whether it's the sculpting, the molding, the painting, virtually all of it is a handmade process. But whether you're molding resin or ceramic, the first thing you do is you start with the sculpt. And this is a sculpt that we have. Melinda might remember it. I'm guessing it's 15 years old.
Yeah, probably.
This is a sculpt that I've brought along on some of the talks that I've done for conventions, etc. If we were going to do this in a resin mold, we would have the artist sculpt it. So this is a farmer carrying a bushel of apples. Right now the farmer's been sculpted. He's on a base. He's got the apples. It's a done deal. We're ready to mold. And let's talk about resin first. So we've got the piece. It's ready to mold. We take a we take the piece and we cast it. We'll put it into the rubber, and then we'll essentially create a two-piece rubber mold. And so we can take the master, set it aside, make the mold, and then you've got two holes, one for the product, one for the air to escape. You put the product in here, usually with a syringe. The material for resin is a two-part process, A and a B. When they're mixed together, they begin to harden. You put the piece in, the mold heats up, that tells you the hardening is done, and you can pull the mold apart. It's a rubber mold, so you can get away with a lot of undercuts and things like that, so you can end up pulling the whole piece out. And so now you have your first production piece right off of the original master. So again, you take the wax model, you create a rubber mold, you create the top half of the rubber mold, pull the master out.
And this is like a silicone-based?
Yeah, this is a silicone rubber, and again, the advantage of the rubber is it's flexible, and so you can take things like just his hands holding the basket. That could be an undercut, the arms, everything can be an undercut, but with rubber you don't have to worry about it because you can just peel the rubber off around the piece.
And undercutting is something that you have to be aware of when you're using.
Yeah, and I'll show more of that with the porcelain. So you have a lot more flexibility, literally because the mold is flexible, but also you don't have to be as technical about preparing the original wax for molding. And so there are times when we'll do attachments when it gets really skinny or there's a long piece attaching it. Sometimes you do have to do attachments, but generally with a figurine you can do pull them out of rubber. So these two pieces would have come out of one rubber mold, and then the base with the hat, a third rubber mold, and then they're glued together and painted, and then the attachments are set on. If we're going to go to a porcelain mold has to come out of, for a porcelain figurine, has to come out of a plaster mold. So to Melinda's question about undercuts, this is a 4-part mold just to get this piece of wax out of here. This is a hose reel, I think for the Dickens Village Fire Brigade. And you can see all of these bumps on here. Well, if this was in a mold, you wouldn't be able to pull it out because of the mold lock. These all create undercuts, but if you can remove the mold, then you can remove the part. So when we have a figure like this, we just can't mold this in porcelain in a hard mold and expect to get it out because of all the undercuts. So the sculptor literally has to cut and create the sculpt into 6 different pieces. Each piece has to be molded in a hard plaster mold, and then
so you're going to have 6 sets of molds
exactly
to make this one little figure.
One set of molds for the base, one set of molds for the torso, the head and chest, the bushel of apples, and the 2 arms. Each thing has to be molded separately because you just can't pull this out because it's rigid, it locks in place. The rubber mold, we can bend and peel it. The porcelain, because of the mold process, you just don't have that freedom to take a hard object out of a hard object without it breaking. So that's the biggest difference between a porcelain piece, a ceramic piece, and a resin piece, where you can get it all out of the mold in one piece. In some cases, I think that there's more of an appreciation of an art form for a porcelain and ceramic figurine, but there's more and more of a demand for, especially in the collectible world, like comics and things like that, with action figures and things like that. A really quality resin piece will be able to capture all the subtleties of a action figure on a large scale in painting. But in terms of our world with the houses and the figurines, you really need a lot of a specific factory, kilns and all of that. It's a big process. Something like a resin thing you could really do at home if you if you have the patience and the right materials, you can literally do it in your basement. Whereas the figurines and porcelain and resin require each piece to be molded separate and then assembled and then fired and then painted. The resin, you can shoot the material into a mold, pull it out, and you're ready to paint.
And when you make these pieces, then how do you attach them together?
If porcelain or ceramic, you would take them out of the mold when they're ready, and then you would take a slip, which is the liquid porcelain, and you would paint it on, and then you would just attach them together.
And that's all done before it's fired?
Yep, you put them all together before firing, and then once the pieces are all assembled with the slip, and again you're just brushing on a liquid porcelain, and you put it all together, then it's put in a kiln. In the case of porcelain, I believe it's 1800 degrees Fahrenheit for about 12 hours. When the piece comes out, it's a piece of glass. If you dropped it, it wouldn't break on all the seams. It would just shatter as if it was one solid piece of glass.
So the firing kind of melds it together.
It fuses it all together. It becomes one piece, essentially one piece of glass, whether it's ceramic or porcelain.
Nate, do we have any questions from collectors?
Yeah, when is the new Snow Village pieces for Christmas vacation? I think they're talking about the pool and snots. When will those be available?
That they should be, I believe it's mid-November?
I believe so.
Right before Thanksgiving, I believe,
Yeah.
is when and of course it will be dependent on when their retailers place their orders and, just how quickly they can get those shipped. But the minute they come into the warehouse, they're ready to get those orders back out the door and to the retailers.
Somebody's asking, Rick, is the wax molding process kind of a lost art?
Is it a lost art? I would say that in the big world of production, it's probably becoming a lost art. But in the smaller world of crafting, collectibles, things like that, I think there is room for artists to develop and move that stuff into there. I've been to craft shows, art fairs, and things where I've seen more and more little figurines and things that are not clay but are porcelain, and they're nice. They can do things that clay and things can't do.
Now, these are all sculpted by hand, correct?
Yeah, everything we do is by hand. We sculpt that, whether it's a house, a figurine, or resin. It begins with a sculpt in wax, and then the wax is then molded depending upon the material. Silicone rubber if it's resin, plaster molds if it's porcelain or ceramic. The molding is all done by hand. The demolding and assembly is by hand, painting. So again, just stressing that for a lot of areas, it is a lost art. For Department 56, it's our main bread and butter. Just mastering the art of the hand built.
Question: how long do you keep the molds?
It's a good question. If you take a plaster mold, a plaster mold, what you do is you pour in a liquid porcelain. It's called a slurry. It goes into the mold, and what happens once it's in the mold is the mold starts pulling the moisture out of the slurry, and what you're left with is a hollow product inside. You do that once, you get a little moisture. You do that twice, you get a little more moisture. You run it over a production cycle, the mold starts breaking down because it's pulling out so much water. Mm-hmm. So there is a lifespan on the mold. It's anywhere between 30 to 60 pieces. It just depends upon how much detail. A porcelain mold will probably break down quicker than a ceramic mold. A silicone mold, on the other hand, will last a reasonably long time, but what happens with a silicone mold is it does start drying out and it'll start cracking. And once it starts cracking, it has fissures in the stuff, and the resin will go out through the cracks. So even though this is much more durable, it does have a lifespan just in terms of drying out.
So if you're making, for example, 1,000 pieces, you might have to have 100 or 150 molds.
Yeah, certainly if you're dealing with the hard mold, with a porcelain or ceramic. If you deal with resin, you might have the capacity to use one mold for a run like that, but the efficiency of trying to get that done, you'll probably make several master molds so that you can get the production done in a better time frame.
Okay.
Can you give any hints for what's coming in 2020?
I knew that question was going to come up.
I think it's good stuff. Yeah. I think every
That's a
village
good-
is going to
good
have
answer.
a nice focus. I think if we were going to look at New England, I'm excited with some of the things we're doing with New England for the intro coming up.
What about other types of materials like pewter that was used in Seasons Bay?
Seasons Bay, that molding process would be very similar to the silicone mold. You can get different types of silicone that are more resistant to heat. For people who know something about jewelry making, you heat up the metal, you put it in a centrifuge, you spin it, the liquid shoots into a silicone mold, and you pull it out, and you'll have your die-cast metal piece. That's essentially that's how we did the Seasons Bay figurines. And again, it's a different temperature rated silicone so that it can handle the liquid metal, hold its form, and get the part out.
Yeah. For those of you who may not be familiar with Seasons Bay, all of the accessories were made out of pewter, and then they were hand painted.
Yeah, even though they were probably 1.25 inches tall,
Yeah.
they were all hand painted.
And did you use pewter to get detail for those? What was the reason for that?
Well, one of the things that we did differently on that line that we did with the traditional lines is we scaled the figurines closer to the houses, if you're going to compare people to houses. And so in that case, we made the figures quite small, and in that case, you with the arms and the legs and everything, it's just too small for porcelain. And so we went with the die-cast metal because not only can you get the size small enough, but with all those little appendages, it's much sturdier. So these arms aren't going to break off easily like they would with a porcelain and a glass product.
Good question.
Yeah.
Any plans for any more licensed pieces in Snow Village?
Yes.
Always, right?
If we can find a license that is a logical fit for our villages, we certainly do take a look at it. We've had a lot of fun and a lot of success with the National Lampoon Vacation, and we are always looking for opportunities. And I think today believe it or not, we just started talking about our January 2021 introduction, which we're starting to develop now, and that's when we start looking at licensing. And I think we've got a couple good ideas that we're hoping to develop for Snow Village specifically.
Have you ever considered dressing Christmas in the City accessories in more modern styles?
Right now, I think that Christmas in the City, right now, we have not looking at it beyond the time range that it is right now.
20s and 30s?
Yeah, so we're looking at, I think we've had some nice product going in there. Tom's done a wonderful job with the skyscrapers. I think we'd like to keep the skyscraper story going and some of the others, but we just like what we've been able to achieve with Christmas in the cities, and I think, as far as I can tell, that's where we're going to stay with that piece, with that village.
Okay. Great questions. Thank you. Our next Facebook Live will be coming up on the 19th, and we hope to have some more interesting topics, and I would really like to have other folks from Department 56 join me and answer some of your questions. I think this was a really interesting start, Rick, and I
Right.
hope you'll come back and visit with us again.
What?
And if put them on the spot here. But we hope you will join us again, and maybe if you've got more questions, do put them forth on Facebook. And if there's something that I can't answer, I'll just run down to Rick's office and ask him the question and see if we can get you the answers. So till next time, take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.